Yo, what up? 8:16. Just got to work. It's a good day today. So, title of this stream is called the Action Hooks Pattern with React Hooks. I'm actually really excited about this because, oh, chat's not working. Well, that's not cool. Let me reload that. The Action Hooks pattern, I'm really excited about it because it's a crucial stepping stone for me in getting away from Redux and using React hooks. And, you know, it's something, getting away from Redux is something that everybody's like, oh, it's so easy, you just use Reducer. But, you know, you slowly start to figure out that there are things that Redux did for you or could still do for you that you don't have with hooks, but we're slowly chipping away at those problems. One of the things that I missed about Redux was having these abstracted actions that I could import and bind and then just kind of use anywhere in my app. And I feel like that's the way that a lot of applications work is you're somewhere in your UI, you want a button that's going to do something, you're going to change something, and you want to just import that action, a reusable action, and just kind of have it work. So I wanted to show you guys how I'm approaching that problem now, and this is going to be kind of like my guinea pig test for this paper that I'm writing, this blog post I'm writing about this very subject. Let me post you the Code Sandbox link I'm in right now, and I'll go live in the Code Sandbox if you guys want to follow along there, but you could probably just watch my screen. And here we are. Make this a little bigger for you guys. Hide my doc. So, just starting off with like this blank index file here. I wanted to get to productivity as quickly as possible. So to show you guys what I'm talking about, so I have a make store function here that just makes a store that's built with hooks. I'm actually just going to rename this make store and leave that in there as the default export. Export default and use memo, use state, use context. Cool. And then this stuff I'm actually going to bring in as my application. So first I'm going to import that make store from the make store function. And if you're curious about what that make store is doing, I have another video that talks about building a global state management solution with hooks, and it's basically what it is. It gives us a provider, and then it gives us a use store hook that lets us read and update the global state. We can make as many of these as we want, but we just need one for now. So forget about the counter for now. Down here, I'm using the store provider at the top of my app, and I'm passing in an initial value. This probably feels reminiscent of Redux because it is a really good pattern. Redux patterns are not bad. They're actually really good. It's just the implementation and the closeness to React that kind of felt like it was missing for a while. So I pass in this initial value, count 0. We're obviously going to have a count subsection of our state. And then we have a counter, and that's just another function up here. It's a functional component where we import the store to our component using useStore. In fact, just to make this a little more clear, I'm going to take this stuff out right here. I'm going to make another file just called store.js. And I'm going to export default make store, just so we have a store instance. That way right here we can just say import store from store. Go into the store. Okay, so now this becomes store.useStore. So we're importing our global state and our updater. And really what we end up doing with like counters is we start building these functions inside of our components at the very first. Here's how to increment and decrement. We attach those onto these click handlers. Right now, these are just functions inside of this counter. But if we ever wanted to share those with another type of counter or any other component, we would actually have to duplicate this logic inside of that component. We don't want to do that. Whether you're dispatching an action or you're just setting the state directly, still, it would be really nice if counter had no idea about the store really at all. And to me, it kind of felt a little similar to the way that Redux worked. You would have like a class which was a counter, and you would pull in the connect function from Redux, and you would connect like the state to the props. You'd say, you know what, I need the count from state.count, and then you could also pass an object of like increment and decrement actions, like Redux actions. They could even be like action creators. And then you would bind that to your component. It's really interesting, this pattern. It's a really cool pattern, actually. You're letting each component subscribe to specific parts of the state that it needs. But more importantly, the part that we're talking about today is you're letting that component get bound versions of these global actions that are just kind of floating around. Well, it turns out we can actually do this with hooks. We don't need a connect function. We don't need to do any of this. We can actually just use them like we would a normal hook. So first things first, let's take out this increment function and put it into its own hook. So we're going to do const use increment, and then we're going to take the store out of here. We're going to put it into the use increment function, and then we're going to take this function we were returning before, and we're going to return it here. Turns out we don't need to read the state right here anymore. And then we can reuse that hook inside of here. So what this does is it gives us back a function that we can use to increment. So we'll say const increment equals use increment. And incidentally, we can do the same thing with use decrement. We can just take this function, pull it out, and return it right here. And we can say decrement use decrement. Okay, so this is pretty sweet. This may look really simple. It may seem really simple out of the gate. It's because it is. But the implications of what this means for your application are amazing. We can take these actions now. In fact, we can take these actions and the entire. Well, we don't want to take the store out just yet. And this is actually going to be store.provider. Oh, I think we're exporting. Yeah, my bad. Don't really want to import store, return provider, use store. We'll just make this an object really quick. So now we can just say store.provider, use increment is not defined. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to import use increment and use decrement from count. You know what, we'll call it from state count. Let's just make a new folder in here. We'll call it state. And then inside of there, we'll make a new folder called count.js. And inside of here, we're going to export these. We also need access to the store inside of there. This is kind of where you start binding, right? But we're not importing the instance of the store right here. That's what's important, is whenever we're binding to the store when we call store.useStore, because it's using React context. So we import the store, and anywhere that we're going to use it, we need to call it like a hook. And since we're just using hooks everywhere, they become very composable. So we'll save that. It says there's still an error in here, but I don't think that's right. Store relative, oh, there is an error in here. We've got to go up a level. Index, we've got an error here. Store state is not defined. State count, right. This is where, for now, I'm only really talking about the actions, the hook actions pattern right now. So we're just going to, we're going to bring in our store, let's see, exports, use store and provider. So really we want the const, this is going to be count equals store.useStore. Okay, we have our counter. It's really small. I hope you can see that. So we basically took that that pattern that Redux originally gave us, where we are binding state and actions to our component and using them, and turned them into hooks. So you can see this is our, we are mapping state, except we don't even have to map it into props. That's the cool thing. We just say, give us a state. And from here, if we wanted to be performant about things, we could use memoization, or we could detect changes and use some better change detection if we didn't want to be updating certain things in here only when the count changes. And then with our actions, we're just using hooks themselves to give us actions. In fact, I want to show you, this is kind of a preview for what could come ahead, but this right here, you could just say const count equals use count. You could turn this into a hook. And then when you come into our little count area right here, we can say export const use count. We import the store, and we just return the count. So really, the only thing we need this store in here for is for the provider. So in fact, let's just show you how much we can break this out. Let's do source, new directory, components. Let's do a new file in components. We'll call it counter. We will export default counter. So here's our counter, and it's extremely isolated. It's a very self-sufficient, independent, whatever you want to call it, because we're saying, you know what, we need the count state, and we need these actions that are going to help us increment and decrement that state. So we import those, and we just know that when we use those in the render function, they're going to be importing and binding whatever they need from context or whatever to work, and we don't need to worry about that anymore. Which means, from the counter's perspective, we could change the underlying implementation of where count comes from, increment and decrement comes from, and this component wouldn't need to know, wouldn't need to understand. Even if we wanted to switch state management implementations altogether, we wouldn't have to even replace any connect functions or replace any imports. We're just using hooks to proxy all of our data and actions through what I am really calling like the ultimate integration layer. That's what hooks are. So if we come back to index here, we need to import counter from components counter. Can't find module state count relative to counter. Well, it's because we got to go up to React is not defined. Import React from React, because we're using JSX. All right. So See, this counter component just stays really dumb. Our state hooks stay really simple, really dumb. You know, hey, somebody wants to use the count. Let's make a hook that gives them the count. Somebody wants to increment or decrement the store or the count in the store. So let's give them a hook that does that. And as long as your state management implementations use hooks, you can compose whatever you want right here. This is really cool because before, in something like Redux, if you wanted to have your router or routing information accessible inside of your actions or inside of your store, you would have needed to pass some middleware or pass like a global variable and inject it into Redux. Some people would rewrite actions themselves to like pass everything through Redux, and you don't need to do that anymore, because if you have a router that says, you know what, when they decrement the count, we want to take them to the home page. You could pull in something like, you know, I really wish Reach Router had this, but you could say const navigate equals use location, and then in this function that you're performing right here, say, yeah, decrement the count and then navigate to the home page. And see, as long as everything is using hooks, you now can integrate and have these actions that are really complex and orchestrate things across your app. You can integrate different stores. You can integrate different sources of truth. You could even have like a local storage. I mean, clearly you could just read and write from local storage here, but you could have something like local storage, use local storage. You could like define a key like token, and then it would give you a getter and setter for that. You'd be like, you know what, this is now like a log out function, and so when they log out, we're going to set the token to undefined or whatever. So you can really start to orchestrate all these complex things happening in your app in just single actions. The other cool thing that this lets you do is, since actions are totally composable, you can actually create actions that consume other actions. So you could say use async decrement. And look, we're going to create an async function. We don't need any middleware. We don't need thunks or anything. We know that we're going to have the store, and it's going to return an async function. And let's just have it wait. Let's await a new promise that resolves in, let's have it resolve in 1 second. And then we're going to set the state. We'll make this an increment. It's more of a positive interaction. We don't need that. So, and right here, this set state, like we're incrementing again, but technically we wouldn't have to do that. We could just come, grab this use increment function right here. We don't even need the store. We just say const increment equals use increment. And we can just call it right there. So see, you can compose together your actions really easily, because hooks are the ultimate composability pattern that React has ever had so far. I mean, other than components being at the root, you know, being composable, that's great for markup, but for logic, hooks are now the ultimate logical composition tool. So we can take this use async increment now, go back to our index, or no, not even our index. We don't even need to look at our index actually anymore, because we're just providing the counter. Come into the counter, we'll say use async increment, async increment, use async increment, and we'll swap we'll make a new one that says async increment plus 1 second. Now we can use our async increment function. 1 second, and it increments. No thunks, no weird bindings. All we're doing is just using hooks. This is what I am internally for me, and maybe you guys want to call it this too, but I'm calling this the action hooks pattern. It's where every action in your app is just a hook. It might not even be actions either. It might just be, data as hooks, because you can see we're bringing in our data as a hook as well. So I hope you guys can see the value in this pattern. I like it because it's helped me get away from Redux. It's helped me embrace hooks. It's way composable. If I wanted to add anything to my hooks, as long as it's hooks compatible, I can do it. And I don't need any special integration. I can just call hooks inside of hooks inside of hooks. And then the other cool thing is that this kind of paves the way for further optimizations. If I want my actions to become smart, with caching or with state, I have access to the full suite of React lifecycle methods inside of these hooks as well. I can use state, I can use memoization, I can create memoized callbacks, I can use side effects. Man, it's really cool. And then last but not least, if I wanted to, I could create some generic hook classes that let me do logging and stuff like that. I could just create a logger that takes in a function and returns a new function that, when called, we'll have it take in a name and a function. We'll have it take in the args, and when they call it, we're going to console log action name. Let's do this. Console log action name, and then we'll log out the action payload, and we can just do action payload, and then we could log out the args. Actually, let's just do it right here. Args. We can take this logger now, and when we return an action, we could say log increment, pass back the action. Now every time that we are incrementing, whoa, we got a synthetic event thing going on here. That's weird. Don't know why that's... Oh, right, it's because it's passing through the event in our counter. We can fix that really quick right here by just doing that. So now you can see when we are calling these. Oh, I forgot one last thing. We actually have to return the function with the args. Yeah. Even when we call the async increment, we could add its own logger for that one as well. We could do let's see, log async. I guess we would need to create an async logger for that one. But my point is that you can extend your hooks, you can compose them however you need to. That there's no more need for middleware or these difficult integration APIs and all these state managers. It's just hooks. Actions can be hooks, and reading state from wherever can be hooks. As long as you're using hooks now, you know that you have forwards compatibility as long as React supports them, which my guess is going to be for a very, very long time. So use hooks for everything. Use hooks for as many things as you can that make sense. I hope you guys liked this video. If you have any more questions, you could ask them now, or you could tweet at me or leave a comment on the video. Either way, I usually like to give 10 or 15 seconds for any questions to come through, and then we'll call it a day. Let's see, is there anything else I could do to clean this up? I mean, this looks and feels pretty good to me. I'm not particularly fond of this logging interface right now, so I'm going to remove that. Yeah, I feel good about it. Okay, no questions? Well, I'm out of here, guys. Thanks for watching. You guys are the best. You can support me if you want by becoming a patron on my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Tanner Lindsley. My next project I'm working on with that Patreon money is going to be React Table. It's really exciting. So check it out. We'll see you guys.